Welcome back to the channel, Adventures Through Climate Change with your host, Trevor, which I don't always introduce myself, and I think, should I? Not everybody's. This might be their first time watching, you know? I mean, it's a good chance because we just started this channel, very few subscriptions. Today, guys, we need to talk about radical climate protests, okay? I don't know how much this is about climate change. DW Planet A tends to be on my side with most things. Have watched things in the past and I'm like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, or I don't think they gave enough focus to it or whatever. But this is something to talk about, right? I mean, are there major issues with activism? Is it warranted? Like, what is going on? And I mean, should it get more or less focus, and what should happen with these people? Because it's affecting everyone else, right? So I think it's something to bring up when we talk about climate change, because if we're going to demonize everything, oil companies, all that stuff, you are going to radicalize some subset of the population. And what are you doing? What are you doing, and what is going on? Let's figure it out. Let's get into this.
Throwing paint at masterpieces.
I saw this.
Blocking traffic. Climbing atop oil terminals. Climate activists are using tactics that have been getting a lot of attention. And they're getting a lot of backlash for it, too.
Did you see that?
Spraying orange paint.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to stop that, but did you see what that thing was burning? She didn't even mention it. Yeah, that was... I'm not saying there's a baby in there, but let's go back for 1 second. Look at that. Oh, I don't even want to show it again. It's a stroller. Basically saying that shouldn't have babies. I'm guessing that's what it is. I'm sorry.
It is an absolute numbskull, knuckle-dragging, daft thing to do.
Their ideas are dangerous and awful.
But the activists insist that desperate times call for desperate measures.
We are concerned citizens, and we have run out of options.
And that these strategies are what cause shifts in our social reality.
We're following a very traditional cycle in terms of the way that social change happens.
We'll try to answer the question that you've maybe asked yourself. Does it distract from the cause, or is it an effective force of change? When two activists representing Just Stop Oil threw a can of tomato soup on Van Gogh's Sunflowers painting in London, it made a big splash. Some outlets were sympathetic to the cause. Others, not so much. Pundits debated if the tactic was effective in bringing about real action against climate change. When Just Stop Oil tried to thwart operations at an oil depot in Scotland, they were called an eco-mob.
I think they're wrong. I think
from
their
oil
action
paint?
is wrong.
You have no right, you have absolutely no right to obstruct other people's daily lives.
I hate what they do. I don't hate them individually. They are deluded if they think they're going to change government policy.
And it's not only journalists and pundits who say the methods can be problematic.
I think it's very important what they're doing at the moment to try to pressurize the state into changing their political direction, of course, in Germany and other countries as well, you know. But for me, at some point, it's too much, right? It's too much when they block the traffic.
Das Problem ist halt nur, dass ja auch eine negative Publicity irgendwie entstehen kann, weil ja so Otto-Normalverbraucher, die dann irgendwie zur Arbeit müssen oder in den Kindergarten haben, die haben halt ein wenig Verständnis.
Extinction Rebellion seems to have had this realization too. The organization says they're quitting public disruption campaigns this year and will focus on relationships over roadblocks. Just Stop Oil, on the other hand, doesn't have plans to stop disrupting the public. Actually, the Van Gogh painting was protected by a sheet of plexiglass. It wasn't damaged and back on display the same day of the incident. The idea of abusing art does seem to alienate a lot of people, but it's actually not new at all.
There's also actually a history of action at museums.
Dr. Dana Fisher is a sociologist at the University of Maryland.
So oil paints?
She studies activism and climate politics.
The suffragettes were famous for slashing art in museums.
Looking back, historians agree this direct action and radical activism changed the course of women's history and led them to gain the right to vote. Civil disobedience was also central to the fight for racial equality, which ultimately led to the pivotal Civil Rights Act in the U.S.
Almost every action that was taken by the civil rights movement, activists, including Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., were all vilified, and public opinion was against them.
Even with the suffragettes, some of them, they had a sort of more radical fringe, and some of them smashed up shop windows when no significant progress was being made with women's suffrage.
Dr. Heather Alborough is a lecturer in global sustainable development at Nottingham Trent University.
So you had that aspect with the suffragettes. In the civil rights movement, you had the MLKs, which are kind of maybe more equivalent to XR right now, and then you had the Black Panthers, who were willing to take up armed self-defense. So I think we definitely see some parallels with previous social movements.
Throughout history, radical forms of protest have been used.
I personally think it's a little bit disingenuous to put the civil rights with the environment thing, because once again, it's pitting what I believe humanitarian right now versus environmental, because right now you cannot choose in the modern day world. You cannot choose between both. You can't have humanitarian and environmental. They work against each other. Poor people are going to die. We've seen this in multiple videos, but poor people die when you make decisions like that. When there's food issues, when whatever, it's the poor people that disproportionately get affected. Okay. And the civil rights thing, which, needed to happen, I feel like is in a whole different category, because that is humanitarian. That's already on this side. So we talking environmental and humanitarian? It's already over there. So I don't know. We'll keep listening.
Used by grassroots movements to shed light on issues when legal and political responses were deemed inadequate.
If we think back to historically, activist vanguards of all sorts, they tend to be more militant, they tend to be more disruptive, and they tend to be more violent. So far, we're seeing really subdued types of, radical forms of activism.
Greenpeace was an early adopter of using confrontation to spur action. In the 1970s, activists put themselves in harm's way to shield whales from harpoons, which eventually led to a moratorium on most commercial whaling. Since then, they've used unauthorized campaigns like disrupting oil rig operations to become one of the largest and most influential environmental organizations.
Direct action is a really important way of getting something to the top of the agenda, getting something in public in the national conversation, and putting pressure on governments and on organizations to engage with this huge issue.
This is Emma Brown, a spokesperson for Just Stop Oil.
I can feel that shock that other people feel, but at the same time, part of me thinks, my God, that's just a bit of soup on a piece of glass, and there's 33 million people homeless now in Pakistan. How dare you be so upset about that?
I mean, we disturb everyday life. I do understand that people are annoyed. And I am sorry for that. I don't want to do that, right?
This is Theodor Schnarr. He's a PhD student and an activist from Letzte Generation, or Last Generation, a German organization that's known for using tactics like blocking traffic.
I want to do my little science in my lab, and then I want to go to my garden and spend time there with my wife. This is what I want to do, but our government not acting forces me into doing activism.
Uncertainty about the climate is a real and serious source of stress. It can feed fear, loss, anger, and a sense of powerlessness, akin to losing a family member. Psychiatrists are reporting that more and more of their patients are expressing eco-anxiety.
When I was born, the world had the chance to consequently reduce emissions. It would have been like 2% per year, and we would be fine now. But they didn't, so we need a big change now.
Many scholars agree with the protests.
When you're going to write about this type of action, you're going to talk a little bit about the message of the activists, and that's where the information gets out to the general public. And it helps to frame the conversation in a way that can be helpful for just keeping the climate crisis in the news and getting the kind of media coverage that these activists believe it deserves.
halting environmental destruction at its source, if you achieve that, that is a successful outcome, as well as drawing attention to an issue generally. So the symbolic aspect of these tactics, creating noise, creating disruption, so that there's more of a focus amongst the public, amongst governments, on a given issue.
But other factors may also need to be taken into account.
You have to talk to the community.
This is Avinash Chanchal. He's a campaign manager for Greenpeace in India.
You have to build the community, right? You have to go to the people, and they will be, and like make them understand what are the issues and why we are fighting for those, the cause, and so on. So having more like engagement with the communities is a must.
But this won't be the last we see of these protests.
As we see lack of action coming from the state as well as the business sector that's sufficient to meet the climate crisis, we are going to see this mass mobilization.
But these protests are being met by clampdowns around the world. Some of the same governments that are making promises to cut emissions are taking measures to make climate protests difficult. In Egypt, which just hosted the COP27 climate conference, climate activists say they fear being arrested just for talking to others about environmental issues. Human Rights Watch spoke to 13 activists, scientists, journalists, and researchers involved in climate action in the country, and none of them wanted to be named in fear of retribution. The New York-based organization accused Egypt of imposing arbitrary funding, research, and registration obstacles, all in an effort to debilitate local environmental groups and even forcing some activists into exile. In Germany, police recently raided the homes of 11 Letzte Generation activists and accused them of forming a criminal organization.
Did they?
They are talking about increasing the punishments for us, but they are not talking about how to save our living, how to save our future.
17 U.S. states quietly passed laws that increased criminal penalties for trespassing, damage, and interference to sites like oil refineries and pipelines.
Surprised Idaho wasn't
This
there.
started happening in 2017, the year after climate activists began protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline, an oil pipeline that cuts through federally protected indigenous land and, according to activists, threatens water sources in the region. Many of the activists protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline were held without bond for days and reported being strip searched for minor infractions.
Okay, let's be real though. I mean, if you commit a crime, you're going to have to face the consequences, or you should at least, in my opinion. And I look, if you think that it is making a big difference doing this, stopping people in traffic so they can't drive, so that their cars are just more emissions going all the time because they're just stopped in traffic and they can't get to work and they're trying to just feed their kids. You know, I mean, these are young people that probably don't have any kids, probably don't have there's a lot to all this stuff, you know, and I just think that when you protest like this, all right, look, if you want change, you got to do the hard stuff, right? I'm making videos right now because I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of being demonized about oil and gas and whatnot. So I'm trying to listen to both sides. It'll be interesting in a year to watch these videos and see what my premise was and see if it's changed. I'm watching both sides of the aisle. I want to know what is going on. I'm not trying to just put my opinion out there. But there's always there's always a bigger picture than what they're showing you. And it only encompasses this much and people are fighting for this much, when it's like, okay, I totally get that's not great. That's not great. But we got to consider all of this, you know, and when you're considering all of this, I'm not really concerned about that, right? Okay, that's just where I am.
In Britain, new legislation has increased the penalty for obstructing a highway and gives police the authority to shut down protests when they disrupt daily life.
Please.
Activists who violate this law can be given an unlimited fine, as well as 6 months of imprisonment. It's a direct response to groups that have stopped traffic or delayed infrastructure projects to campaign for their cause.
These attempts to clamp down show something about the effectiveness of the protest, because at first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they clamp down on you, and then you win.
In India, the founder of the country's chapter of Fridays for Future, Disha Ravi, was charged with sedition.
She's not far off. It reminds me of like kids and stuff. I mean, that's the exact approach they have to getting what they want. Like, I mean, that's the exact, my kids try that same stuff, and then they win, but not always. Sometimes, you know, sometimes daddy's right, you know, and you're just begging for stuff that you shouldn't be.
Incitement, and international conspiracy for creating an online toolkit to support nationwide protests. After an exhausting legal battle, a judge eventually ruled that the police had no right to do this. But it's just one more example of how far authorities in some countries are willing to go to silence activists.
Wow.
One of the things I think we're going to see out of this activism and this wave of activism that happened prior to COP27 is that a lot of people got the message that there was activism taking place and people around the world care about this and they're willing to break the law.
People don't like it because it is disruptive to everyday life, but unfortunately that is the only way to break through both the media and the public perception at large, because this problem isn't going to be solved by, you know, a few protesters going and demonstrating outside Shell HQ. It really needs broad public engagement to get that pressure.
Public engagement is what these campaigns are really after. Climate activists agree that direct action doesn't reduce carbon emissions or stop weather catastrophes from happening, but putting pressure on the government to pass stronger policies just might.
Coming from these very small micro protests that seem really kind of ridiculous when you just break them down and look at the specifics of the action, but the social context of it really matters.
Whatever the strategy, environmental activists feel their efforts are keeping the issue in headlines and in the forefront of people's minds. What do you think about these forms of protest? Let us know in the comments and subscribe to our channel for new videos every Friday.
Me. Douche well. 2023, yes. Wow, when did this come out? 3 days ago. Bingo bango. Okay. I'm already subscribed. We'll lay down a like on that one. I usually go back and like and subscribe because I forget to while I'm watching the video. Thank you, DW Planet A. And I like this one. It just talked about it. It left things up to you to decide. And I think I made my point. What my opinion is, my point on my opinion, not my point on anything else. I'm not really trying to convince anybody. I do want open discussion, and that's just it. That's just it. I think that activism does have a role. The only way to make change is to buck the system, right? Is to buck the system. I mean, I don't necessarily want to go here, but I'm a Christian. And the only way to get values back the way I want them is buck the system. It is what it is. Because other people, if you don't instill your values, other people will instill their values. That's just the fact. There's a void everywhere, and if you don't fill it with something, somebody else is going to fill it. So, with that being said, let me know what you guys think of the video. I thought it was. They put together good videos, and if you don't even want to give me a subscription and a like, give DW Planet A one. I would love one because I'd love to keep this going. These reactions. This is actually out of the 5 channels that I've had, this is kind of the most fun I've had, and probably a big part of it is it's unedited. I mean, I film, I put it on YouTube, do a few things. I don't even mess around with the thumbnail right now. I mean, if this channel gets big, I'll mess around with all that stuff, and I don't know if I'll do an edited form, because I do like the fact that you guys just hear me raw, and I think I personally appreciate that when I see that from other people. So that's just the approach I'm taking. But with that being said, yeah, subscription, like, comment for sure if you don't mind. But I hope to catch you in the next video.